George St-Pierre, or better known as GSP, is regarded among a lot of MMA fans as one of the greatest fighters of all time. He has an MMA record of 26 wins and 2 losses, which he avenged both his losses against Matt Hughes and Matt Serra. He has finished 14 of his opponents and became a champion in 2 different weight classes. In this video, we will show you all his finishes and how he got to the top of the MMA world. In his first MMA fight, George faced Ivan Menjivar and was able to end the fight in the first round by technical knockout while punching Ivan on the ground. GSP's next fight was against Justin Brockman for UCC welterweight championship belt. George is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and he showed his skills on the ground in this fight. In the 4th minute of round 1, George took Justin down and transitioned to side control. After connecting some punches on the ground, he was able to submit Justin by an armbar and become the welterweight champion in UCC. To defend his belt, George fought Travis Galbraith next. As soon as the fight started, GSP took Travis down and had him in side control while smashing his head to the canvas. George kept doing that while punching Travis in the face, and the ref stopped the fight and George won his first title defense. 3 months later, George fought Thomas Denny. George dominated Thomas on the ground in the first round, and in the second round, again he took Thomas down and held him in side control while throwing knees and elbows to his head, which made the referee to stop the fight in the 5th minute of round 2, and GSP won his 4th MMA fight by technical knockout. George fought Pete Spratt for his next fight. The fight was short. George was able to dominate Pete for the entire fight on the ground, and in the 4th minute of round 1, he submitted Pete via rear naked choke and won his 5th fight, finishing all 5 of them. Soon, GSP started fighting in UFC. His first finish in UFC was against Jay Heron. Both fighters were undefeated in their MMA career before this fight. In the 2nd minute of round 1, George connected with a straight right which stunned Jay, and it was the beginning of the end. George then connected with a lead left hook which made Jay to try to take him down, which was unsuccessful. GSP kept the pressure on him and the ref stopped the fight, and George had his first finish in UFC. George's next fight was against Dave Strasser. George had just lost his championship opportunity to Matt Hughes and was motivated to win this fight to be considered a contender again for the belt. This fight was another round 1 finish by GSP. In the 2nd minute of the fight, George took Dave down and passed his guard. He then had Dave in side control and was able to submit him via Kimura and win his 8th MMA fight. George took on Frank Trigg for his next fight. He dominated Frank for the entire fight on the ground, and in the 5th minute of round 1, George submitted him via rear naked choke and ended the fight. George faced Sean Sherk next. Sean had an impressive record of 33 wins, 1 loss and 1 draw before this fight, and George had a record of 10 wins and 1 loss. They both were in their primes and ready to take on the challenge. Although Sean was an excellent wrestler, but he was unable to take George down. On the other hand, St-Pierre took him down in the 2nd minute of round 1 and held him there until the end of the round. In the 3rd minute of round 2, GSP again took Sean down and connected with a lot of punches and elbows until the referee stopped the fight and George won via technical knockout. George fought Matt Hughes next for UFC welterweight championship title. Matt had submitted George in their last fight and St-Pierre wanted to avenge the loss and become the welterweight champion for the first time. Both men were in their primes and Matt Hughes held an impressive record of 41 wins and 4 losses before this fight, which he had finished 20 of them by knockout and 13 of them by submission. George was the better fighter in round 1. 4 minutes into the fight, George took Matt down and in the last seconds of the round, he was able to connect with his Superman punch to stun Matt and drop him with a left hook. But the round was finished before George could end the fight. In the second minute of round 2, George connected with a high kick which dropped Matt, and this time George finished the job and became the welterweight champion. Hughes and GSP weren't done and they fought each other for the third time. George had lost the belt to Matt Serra and this fight was for the welterweight interim title, which whoever won it would face Matt Serra for the championship belt. In the third minute of round 1, GSP took Matt down, passed his guard and stayed on top for the remainder of the round. Right at the start of round 2, George again took Matt down, but this time there was no belt to save him. George stayed calm and passed Matt's guard and was able to submit him via armbar and win the interim title. Now it was time for GSP to fight Matt Serra to avenge his loss and become the UFC welterweight champion again. Matt Serra is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and before this fight he held a record of 10-4, which 5 of the wins came by submission. George dominated Matt for the entire fight. The majority of the time was spent on the ground while GSP was on top scoring points. In the last minute of round 2, George was able to finish Matt by throwing knees to his body while being on the ground and win the fight by technical knockout. GSP's next finish was against BJ Penn. BJ Penn is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He became the World Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion and held the UFC lightweight championship belt in his career. This was the second time the two were fighting each other. George was able to win their first meetup by a split decision. This time, the stakes were even higher because UFC welterweight championship belt was on the line. Both men were on a winning streak and ready to take on each other. In round 1, two fighters just felt each other out and mostly spent the time in the clinch. In the second minute of round 2, George took BJ Penn down, passed his guard and dominated him until the end of the round. Round 3 was the same. GSP kept taking BJ down and connected with lots of punches while being on top. The same thing happened in round 4. GSP completely dominated BJ Penn on the ground. At the end of the round, coaches of BJ Penn stopped the fight and GSP won his second title defense. GSP's last finish was against Michael Bisping for the middleweight championship belt. George had not fought for 4 years before this fight, and everybody thought he would be too rusty to take the belt, but he showed otherwise. The first round was slow as the two fighters were feeling each other out. In round 2, George took Bisping down but was unable to do much damage. Right at the beginning of round 3, George took Michael down again and stayed in Bisping guard while Bisping connected with elbows from the bottom. Bisping was connecting more on GSP until in the 5th minute of round 3, George connected with a powerful left hook which dropped Bisping and George went in for the finish. Bisping was stunned but was still defending. He thought he could get on his feet, which was the wrong call, and George took advantage of the opportunity and submit him via rear naked choke. Now GSP was the middleweight champion and was the 4th fighter in UFC who held 2 championship belts in 2 different weight classes. This was George St-Pierre's last fight in the octagon up to this day.